Hello, this is John Miares from the Great Lakes Regional Field Office in East Lansing, Michigan. In this video, I am going to be demonstrating some of the key features and quirks with the CAPI instrument that has been designed for ARMS Phase 2. Now, keep in mind, this is a brand new instrument that has never been used in production before, so there are bound to be some things that you don't like or think need to be improved or may not work the way you expect them to. What I ask is for your patience as we go through this and that you take the time to fully test the instrument yourself by entering at least one of the practice exercises into the CAPI training system. The other thing I want to emphasize is that I'm fully aware that those of you who've been working with CAPI for quite a while may be able to pick up on some of the items more easily than me, even. And if you see something that could be done in a more efficient way, please don't hesitate to share that with your supervisor and with the rest of your enumerator team. Now, I'm assuming that by the time you get to the point where you're entering data into CAPI, that you've completed the ARMS Phase 2 report on paper already. So I'm not going to get into the reminders about checking your comments, recording your attempted contacts, which you should be doing anyway. However, I cannot emphasize enough that it will be critical to maintain a paper trail for the work that you're doing. So if there is a problem with CAPI, whether it was because something was miskeyed into the iPad or because something just didn't translate well when we pulled the data from CAPI into our systems, that there is going to be a paper trail that we can fall back on. We are asking that you hold on to all completed forms until at least January 11th. Now, another thing I want to emphasize is today is September 30th, 2020, and although we have an instrument available for ARMS Phase 2, we do not have one yet available for the Vegetable Chemical Use Survey. And so the demonstration I'm going to show here should be able to cover well for both instruments because the two surveys are fairly similar to each other. It is possible there are going to be some differences, and hopefully we'll be able to address those without having to create an entirely different video. Now, I'm going to be using my computer for this demonstration, so it's going to be easier to record what I'm doing here. Although most of you are going to be using your iPads for this, some of the items may look a little bit different here. I'm just hoping that what you're going to see is pretty much what is going to be here with this instrument, and that you are going to see what I am seeing when you work with the instrument. I'm going to start by entering data from practice exercise number 1, which you all should have a hard copy of in the packages that were sent to you from the regional field office. If you don't have a copy of that, a copy can be opened from the ARMS 2 page on the Purdue GLR site. With that, I'm currently in CAPI training and I've assigned myself some IDs to myself to use as test records. All of you should have at least one record available to you for testing purposes in CAPI training. If for some reason you do not, then please contact your supervisor or your NASDA coordinator and we can get that corrected. So the one I'm going to choose is going to be this one. And let's see, we have our verify information here. I'm going to verify the address, and it is going to open up the CAPI instrument. Now, the first thing that you're going to see here when we open this up is it's going to say operator owner provided consent over the phone. Well, again, the wording for this question is going to be changed a little bit because this is going to be tied specifically to whether or not the operator is providing consent for you to contact a custom applicator to collect the spray records. However, the way the routing in this questionnaire will go, in order to enter any data into CAPI, we pretty much need to agree to this answer. Otherwise, it'll essentially go to the very end and it will consider the report to be a non-response. So I'm going to hit check to agree, and I'm going to click on next. We enter our beginning time, just like you would expect. I'll just say it started at 11 o'clock. We're going to look at the partner information, which should be pre-populated in here. And I'm going to just check that this was verified, send it on its way, check that this one is verified, send it on its way. And then we don't have any partners otherwise for partner 4 or partner number 5. After we validated the partners, we're now going to go into the meat of the questionnaire. We're first asked, how many total acres of soybeans did this operation plant in the 2020 crop year? We can enter this into the cell. This example had 1,500 acres with 9 fields. You could also use the calculator in order to enter these particular values in here. As I go to next, it says to identify the soybean field that we're going to be using for this survey. The direction is indicated on the label of the questionnaire. It is also on the label of the kit envelope. It should also be listed in your detailed assignment listings. For this particular example, we're assuming we're using the northernmost field on the operation. So I'm just going to click northern field. And I'm just going to come up with a name to help describe where this field is actually located. And I'll just say near the town shed. I want to know how many acres of soybeans were planted in this field for the 2020 crop. And according to my practice exercise, it is a 60-acre field. So I will type in 60 in here. The next question is asking, were commercial fertilizers, nutrients applied to the selected field for 2020? Include those operated from landlord? Yes. Now, for this particular example, we had, now this is where it gets a little bit interesting. If you look carefully at the way that example is structured, it says that there was one application, but there were 2 different fertilizers applied to the field. The way that this question is set up, in order to be able to look at the 2 different fertilizer products, what we're going to need to do is put the number 2 here. But I'm going to add a comment which is going to say, actually did a blend of 2 fertilizers in the same application. And that's going to be important so that we know how many times the operator has passed over the field. So now here is where we are going to be able to enter the fertilizer information. There's a few different ways that we can do this. One way is to just enter the formulation in here. I'll say this is 0, 0, 60, 0. What quantity was applied? Or say 200 pounds. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that I'm already running out of room. And on your iPad, this is going to be a similar situation because your iPad screen is only so wide. What I would recommend doing is going up to here where you would normally see the hamburger, looking at this menu on the side and closing that up. And that's going to hopefully open up some extra space for you to be able to record more information and to be able to see the entire table. So here I am on my first line. I've got this 200 pounds per acre. I'm going to say, when was this applied? This was going to be applied in the spring before seeding. So I'll say here, in the spring before seeding. How was it applied? It was applied using broadcast without incorporation. And how many acres were treated? We're going to say it was the entire 60 acres. Now, another way that we can record the fertilizer information is if we know the actual name that was applied to this. So if I click on this blue screen here, what I'm going to get is the list of different fertilizers that we have in our respondent booklet. So one possibility here is that if you see the fertilizer that was applied, we could just directly pick that from the list. So I'll just say they put on potassium nitrate, although that isn't the one from the example. But if I select potassium nitrate, then it will automatically fill in those values into the table. I then just need to add the further information in here. I'll say it was 100 pounds per acre this time. And again, I'll say it was in the spring before seeding, and we'll do broadcast ground without incorporation. Now, in order to look at some more ways that we can use that search feature, I'm going to back up and I'm going to add a couple more lines of fertilizer here. So I'm going to say, make that a 4. I will go now here. We've made that a 4. It's now open 2 additional lines in my fertilizer table. If you don't want to scroll through the entire list of different fertilizers that are available, one thing that we could do is just type something into the search box like anhydrous. If I just type ANH, that will bring anhydrous ammonia directly to the front. I will hit select, and then that will autofill 82% nitrogen on here. So I'm just going to put 50 pounds. And I'll say this was done after seeding and that it was foliar directed spray. One warning that I will give in using this list is, let's say we pick something that has a range in it. Like say we're looking at ammonium phosphate. If I select this, it's going to try to autofill the range into the various cells. So it's going to say 11 to 18 or 46 to 48. You don't want to leave those ranges in there. I believe on the computer side of things, when we go to pull it in, it will end up pulling the low number, or it might not pull anything at all. So if this was supposed to be 1846, then I would actually change this to 18, then 46, then 0, 0, and then I'll add my totals here. We'll say 100 pounds after seeding, foliar directed spray. And then again, I need to make sure that my data are consistent across the cells 60 acres here. All right, so let's go to the next screen. And the next screen is where we are going to now be asked about, were there any herbicides, fungicides, or other biocontrols practiced on the soybean crop? We'll say yes. How many products were applied? To save ourselves a little bit of time, I'm just going to say 4. I guess we could say 5. Let's do the 5. All right. It's giving me 5 lines of chemicals that I can enter the data into. So this is going to look a lot like the left-hand page. You're not going to be able to see all of the data for both sides of the table right away. We're going to have to go to the next screen to be able to follow along and enter the data that you would normally see on page 7 of the paper questionnaire. The first chemical that is being entered on here is Buccaneer. And Buccaneer, easiest way that I would do this, and I would strongly recommend, even though it might be a pain, we'll click on this chemical lookup, and this is going to show you pretty much everything that is in the respondent booklet. It says showing 1 of 10 of 407 entries. Knowing that what I'm looking at is Buccaneer, I'm going to type into the search box BUC, and there I have it here, Buccaneer glyphosate herbicide. I have the EPA number that I can verify things with, and it has the code. So if I select this, it will automatically fill that I have the right product here. It will put in the product code, and it will tell me whether it was liquid or dry automatically, because it will know this from the respondent booklet. Now, this is going to be part of a 3-mix tank mix. So I'm going to say that this was going to be line 1 is the first line of my tank mix, that this was going to be before planting, and I applied 1 quart per acre. So I'm going to type in a 1 in this column, and then nothing in here for the total amount, and then I can pick quarts. The second line was going to be 2,4-D LV4. And now there's a bunch of 2,4-Ds in here. If I go to do the lookup, I could just start by typing the number 2. And again, that narrows it down quite a bit, but I still have 17 entries that I could be picking from. It does say 2,4-D LV4, so that's going to come up with this product code 40657. If you don't know that that's the right one, you can do a double check using the EPA number and see if that all lines up. Now, one thing I want to emphasize, I'm going to cancel from here. Let's say you just knew, oh, it's 40657. If I was to try just typing in 40657, it isn't letting me enter that last 7. It's only letting me put in 4 digits. So really the only way that we're going to be able to get the right chemical in here is to use that little blue icon to get the codes in the way we want them to. So the other thing that you really can't do, unfortunately, is you can't just type 2, 4-D and expect that it's going to pick up what we want. In order for it to get the right formulation and the right chemical name, I need to use this little blue icon, do the lookup, and I'm going to be picking here 2,4-D LV4 and hitting select so it knows I'm doing the correct chemical with the correct formulation. And again, this was done as part of the tank mix with the first chemical. And it said I applied 1 quart per acre. This is also going to be before planting. Remember, we want to make sure that those are going to be consistent as we enter them all for the tank mix. So this is going to be 1 quart per acre. Now, my third line on here, my third chemical that it says in the practice exercise is something called ledger. Now, if I go looking up ledger, what you're going to see here is that it's not there. And that is going to be somewhat problematic. But this is no different than what we would have done had we had to do this on paper. So what do we do from here? Well, there is an option to add the extra information about what we don't know about the chemicals in here. So I can type, all right, on line 3, the pesticide type, this is going to be a herbicide. I can now get the EPA number, which is 100-1162. It says the form purchased was a liquid. And I'm just going to say, where was it purchased? I'm going to just say Wilbur Ellis, just as a name to put in there. And that will allow us to get the information that we need. Now, one of the other things that we could do when I click on this icon is I could do the search by the EPA number. And as I look at that EPA number, I'm getting something called boundary 6.5 EC, which is an alternate name for this product. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select that. And hopefully we would have realized this before we would have gotten to this point in the survey. So this one says we're using 1.75 pints. That is part of that tank mix. So again, it's going to be before planting. I will type this in as 1.75 and then enter over here, pints. Now we have the post-emergent herbicide applications here. We have another application of Buccaneer. So I'm going to again pull in Buccaneer glyphosate herbicide as so. This one came as part of the tank mix for line 4. This was after planting. And again, they put 1 quart. And the final product was something called gramoxone. But again, I can't just type the name in here. I do need to hit my blue icon. And as I go with here, gramoxone intion, I'll select that. I have it as part of the tank mix with line 4. It was applied after planting, and this was only going to be 1 pint. All right, let's go on to the next screen. And this is where we are going to now enter the information that you would normally see on page 7 of the questionnaire. What you'll notice is that the chemical product name was carried over from the previous table, so you're not going to have to scroll back and forth. How is the product applied? Well, for my pre-plant stuff, this was broadcast without incorporation. And for my post-emergent herbicides, these were foliar or directed sprays. How many acres? I'm just going to enter that these were 60 acres throughout. How many times was it applied? It's going to be 1. And again, for anything in the tank mix, we need to make sure that the data are going to be consistent all the way across. Once we've entered all of our data into section D, we're ready to progress on to section E. These are pretty much just yes or no questions. So as we look at our paper copy here, we can just essentially enter in what we're seeing here. So based on this, I'm going to have yes, weather data were used, no, and then yes, yes, no. And then I can click onto here. Was this deliberately scouted? And as soon as I check yes, that it was deliberately scouted, that is going to open up these questions that need to be routed. If the questions down here don't need to be asked because of a skip instruction, they will not open up for you. So in terms of answering the questions that we have here, we're going to say that yes, there was an established process, but it was not for pest advisory warning, not for a pest development model. And then here, as we open this up, what was the field scouted for? We're going to say, yes, it was scouted for everything. And again, that does open up these pull-down menus. These were going to be lower than normal, but the disease was actually higher than normal. Who did the majority of the scouting? That was going to be the operator. So I'll just pick this as the operator and move forward from here. Did we use field mapping in order to do this? This was going to be a no. So I will enter this as a no. Now, since these are all pretty straightforward yes/no questions, I'm not going to fill in these gaps because I think you can handle figuring out how to do those on yourselves. So the next section we're going to be looking at is section E1. And the structure here is a little bit different from what you're normally used to. What they've set up here is what they call this accordion patterning. So these are all the various questions associated with question 1 of section E1 for the selected field where any of the following pesticide spraying activities used in 2020. And we have all these questions altering spraying times, using drift reducing adjuvants, drift reducing nozzles, and so on. So in this particular case, they did not alter spray times based on weather conditions, so I'm going to click on no, and what you're going to see is it's going to jump to the problem that says, well, why wasn't the activity used? And this is where we can then enter the information for other, saying that we had good weather. Now they did use drift reducing adjuvants. So I clicked on the plus sign here to open up that. Did they use drift reducing adjuvants? Yes. And when I click yes, it's going to unlock the questions that would need to be answered if you said yes to this first part. Was it specifically used to keep pesticide applications on target? Yes. How easy was it? It was very easy. Then we go to the next one. We open that one up. Drift reducing nozzles? Yes, those were specifically used in order to to deal with reducing the uh, pesticide problems that you would normally have here. So that's typically what you're going to be doing. Again, I'm not going to be doing every single one of these, but again, if the answer is going to be yes, you click on the yes, and it is going to open up the questions that you would need to fill in for the yes question. If the answer is no, for example, here, increase gallons per acre based on the spray solution, I'm going to say no, and then it will ask, well, why not? And again, they might have said we had good weather. If you don't know if something was used, we can just click on don't know, and then you're not required to answer any of the other questions. You are going to need to open up every single one of these options to answer them because every question here needs to be answered with a yes, no, or a don't know. All right, now let's go on to the next question where they're asking about whether or not pre-emergent pesticide applications were applied to the field during 2020 using ground boom sprayers or aerial sprayers. Well, in this case, knowing from Section D, we did have pre-emergent herbicide applications, so we can say yes. If this was done through ground boom sprayers, we would say yes, and it will ask us to fill in the table. If it said we used aerial sprayers, we click yes, but then it will bypass the table. If we did not make pre-emergent pesticide applications, we can check no. However, you know that we did based on what we put into Section D. So I'm going to click on yes. And this is where we're going to have this table that we will fill in with the various questions. Now, I'm going to switch really quick over to the paper questionnaire. So what you're going to notice here on the paper questionnaire is you were filling in various codes in here. That the typical spray volume, you had a code 5. For the operating pressure, we had a code 5. And then we were working with these as with a 5 in there. The problem that we're going to have with this is that when I go to look at the pull down options here, I'm not seeing codes, I'm seeing values. And so, what I would strongly recommend when you are going through this yourself is you want to maybe circle the options that were actually used. So, maybe going into here and saying, let's circle the 5, and let's circle the 5 here. This is circling option 4 for a flat nozzle. This is circling 2 for going 5 to 10, so that when you are transcribing the data into the CAPI system, you're less hung up on the code and you're more able to look at what the values are supposed to be. So now that we're going up to here, I can now match what I had on the paper form to what is in the pull down menu. This was a flat cone, but speed was 5 to 10. What was the boom height? Was 24 to 36. Target droplet size was very coarse. And the tables that we're going to see for the next few questions are very similar. So again, we can just enter them here, but if we have those values already recorded and circled on our paper copy, then it's going to be much easier to get the correct data recorded here. Because especially if there's a lot of choices that you're picking from, it could be very easy to mistake which option you're doing. Well, is that option 5 or is that option 4? In our last case, the question is asking about post-emergent insecticide or fungicide. If you look back at Section D, everything that we applied was a herbicide. So we're going to say no, it didn't make any post-emergent insecticide or fungicide applications, and then we go on our way. All right, once we get through those particular questions, then we have some pretty easy pick lists to work with. So, all right, this was done through a scheduled calibration, so I'll check the box there. For the selected field, when did the operation clean it? So it did before, it did after, depending on the product, regularly scheduled cleaning. For each time that it was cleaned, how often was a tank cleaner used? Again, this is one of those cases that on the paper questionnaire you have a code, but here we just have a pull down menu, so it's going to be important that you pay attention to the order and the code that we're working with. So in this case was going to be always. Did this operation use separate spray rigs? One thing I want to point out on here is on the paper questionnaire, the order in which these are showing up is not the same as what you're seeing in CAPI. So on the paper form, the order of the questions is yes, no, and then don't know. But in the CAPI instrument, it has yes, don't know, no. Some people might be looking at the visual and expecting, oh, I'm just going to put the middle box. So just be very cautious about that. We have asked headquarters to fix this. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do that before this instrument goes into full production. In our next screen, this is just going to be the easy pick list. So we've got where do we count the majority of the nozzles? We're going to be plastic. Why do we deal with this? Was calibration problems. And again, what proportion of hedgerows were used? We're just going to say there weren't any. Now this is where we're going to have that particular table that shows up on page 16 of the paper questionnaire. So we have the various columns that are entered in here that say how often was each practice used to manage herbicide resistance, fungicide resistance, insecticide resistance. This particular operator only used herbicides on this field, so we're only going to be entering information into this column. So what we have here, we said this was going to be an often. For weed control, this was going to be often. As I go into the next one, we have this was going to be an always. This one wasn't always. And this one wasn't often. And we don't need to fill in any of these columns. Like I said, again, these are columns that are used to manage fungicide resistance or insecticide resistance. Since those were not used here, then we can leave those columns blank. So on the next screen, asks, are the spraying practices for other fields in this operation similar to those for the selected field? Again, the intention of this question is that we're looking at soybean field and their spraying practices, not just any field in the operation, because obviously you would say, well, I'm not going to spray my corn fields the same way I would spray my soybean fields. So if they're assuming that they do everything the same, we're going to click yes. And now this is where we have the table. This is the one from page 18, no, 17. So all these values here, again, we're going to be issues of dealing with codes normally, where we would say like 1 was always and 2 was often and 3 was sometimes. This is again one where you're going to have to pay very close attention to how these codes are going to be handled. So we had here 1, 2, 3, 3, and so on. Now, let's say I'm not going to fill in the rest of these right now for time consideration. Since we have university cooperative extension services that were utilized, now it should ask this question. If not, it will skip this question. So as I fill these out, we have, again, this was sometimes, sometimes, often, and maybe a never. And again, you can fill in these values as you see fit. With the next question, we have this pick list about an effort to reduce off-target impacts to plants, pollinators, and so on. Did the operation communicate or consult with any of the following sources? If the answer is none, then you are welcome to leave this blank. There is no option for none here. Then as we go on to the next screen, these are the questions about best management practices. So the question then becomes, I need to figure out which ones of these are going to be best management practices that we've used. Maintain buffers between beehive locations. We're going to say this was always, and yes, it was done to do that. Make applications when temperatures are below 50 degrees. They could say, well, I did that, but it wasn't necessarily to take care of the bees. Next option, maintain a buffer between beehive locations. You might say, no, I didn't do that. And notice what happens when I said never, this pull down option grays out. So you won't be expected to answer this of was the practice used to specifically prevent exposure to bees if you never actually did that practice. So when I make this using never, then I'm going to leave that blank. Or the same thing if we have a don't know, then that also will make sure that that is grayed out. But if we were to say, well, I'm going to avoid applications when dew is here, well, I'm going to say yes, but maybe that wasn't necessarily because you were considering the bees. On this question here, it's asking about auditing systems and did this operation participate in any? This is another question where the choices that you can select in your pick list in CAPI are not in the same order as those on the paper questionnaire. So, for example, you might say that this operation did not participate in an auditing system, which is not unreasonable because unless the soybeans are produced for human consumption, you probably would have no reason to participate in an auditing system like this. In the CAPI instrument, to say this operation did not participate in an auditing system is the third choice. But if I take a peek at the paper form, that option is the fourth choice in the pick list. So again, it's going to be very important that you pay very close attention to what you're entering in here. This is going to be one of those spots where we did ask headquarters to make a fix so that the choices in CAPI would be in the same order as they were on the paper questionnaire. I'm not sure they're going to be able to fix this before the survey goes into production, or if they'll be able to fix it at all before the survey is over. So simply pay close attention because there is a difference in how we will interpret the answers. Because if you were to check don't know instead of no, I don't participate in the system, then how we interpret those results is going to be very different downstream. So here we are at the conclusion of the questionnaire. This is where we can enter the operator's email address if they want to have a copy of the survey results sent to them. Say John Doe at doefarms.com. We'll enter our ending time here. We'll say we finished at 12 noon. And we want to say if the respondent used farm or ranch records in order to be able to provide fertilizer or pesticide data, we'll check both of these as yes. So what you'll notice here is that there is no location to enter the number of supplements required for this survey. The general assumption, I believe, is that the CAPI instrument should be able to accommodate however many chemicals that you're going to need. If you don't have enough lines provided for you in the CAPI instrument, which for soybeans should be rare, it's highly unusual in past years that we've ever used pesticide or fertilizer supplements in ARMS 2 when the target crop is soybeans based on the number of chemicals that are typically applied. But if you have to use a supplement, then you're going to have to contact us and we're going to have to figure out how to get that data into the system manually. As we get close to the end here, the system is going to ask you for the operation email, the operation phone number. This is just like what you're going to see on the back page. Again, we have the respondent name, respondent phone number. Be sure to check the box if the numbers that are reported to you are going to be cell phone numbers. And then finally, we get to this last screen, which you all should be fairly familiar with, where we can select that this was a complete response that was done by the operator or the manager. If we know who the operator's name is, we don't need to enter the operator's name here. We'll enter the mode, which for most of these is going to be telephone on paper, and then we'll make sure that we enter our enumerator number. Now that we're on the last screen, this is where we can either save the record for review or you can submit the survey. This is a place where you will want to have a good conversation with your supervisors regarding how they want to review your work. Do they want to look at it all first through Save for Review? Do they only want to look at a few of them? Make sure you're having that conversation with your supervisor, because once you hit the Submit Survey and click OK, which I'm not going to do here right now, the record is going to be sent directly onto us in the office. So those are the highlights that I have to share with you for this CAPI instrument. Again, as part of your training here, the expectation is that you take at least one of the practice exercises provided and enter it into the CAPI training system so that you can get a good feeling for yourself as to what is going to work, what isn't going to work, and what quirks you may need to pay close attention to. Of course, if you see any other errors in the instrument that I didn't catch here, perhaps some bad wording, questions getting skipped that shouldn't be skipped, answers not sticking, anything we can do to make this instrument better, it is important that you let us know through your supervisors right away so we can try to get things fixed. Again, this is a brand new instrument. It's never been used in the field before. There are bound to be other problems that I haven't identified in this video. So please be on the lookout for them. That's all I have to talk about here. Thanks for watching. We look forward to working with you on this survey, and the best of luck.